I'd like to call this council and committee meeting to order. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge that the land upon which we are situated is the traditional territory of the Adirondack, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe people. We are the beneficiaries of ancient agreements, such as the dish with one spoon between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, who agreed to share the abundance of the land through peace, friendship, and mutual respect. The two-row wampum, by which the Haudenosaunee welcomed the settlers and agreed to share the land in mutual respect, and the Treaty of Niagara, considered a fundamental document by First Nations in all future relations and treaties with the British. We recognize that we have a responsibility to be stewards of the land in cooperation and collaboration with the Indigenous peoples, not only for one generation, but for all generations to come. We understand that we have an obligation to learn the lessons of our history, educate ourselves about the experiences of the Indigenous people, and seek opportunities to heal the wounds that will result in reconciliation with our Indigenous sisters and brothers. Many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people live and work in Fort Erie. We stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. We have the good fortune to live in a land of such abundance, diversity, and beauty. Let us be vigilant in protecting Turtle Island. Mr. Clerk, the roll call.
Your Worship, all members of Council are present.
Thank you. Just some very brief announcements. We are going through an official plan review, and I'm advised by staff that they plan to have some pop-up booths at the following locations. So actually the only one left is July 11th, which is the Crystal Beach Supper Market. They're going to be there between 4 and 9 p.m. So if people have comments with respect to the official plan, you can check out what we've got on our website and then advise staff who are at the Supper Market on July the 11th. Speaking of the Supper Market, I just wanted to mention that that is in full swing now. Every Thursday evening from 4 o'clock, you can get an excellent meal, listen to some good music, enjoy the scenery at the Waterfront Park in Crystal Beach. On July the 14th, the Sunday Friends of Crystal Beach concert continues at Waterfront Park. That starts at 7 p.m. And on July the 20th, there are a couple of events in Crystal Beach. One is the Circle of Arts at Queen's Circle. That starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then in the evening, Groove in the Grove on Erie Road, which starts at 5 p.m. That's what I had on my calendar. You councillors, if you have any items in your BIAs or if there's things going on that I've missed, by all means, let me know in advance and I'd be more than happy to refer to them. There is an addendum this evening as well, and that is we're going to be receiving a delegation from Kimberlyn Smith, our junior community planner, with respect to the heritage property designations. The report PDS 38-2024 relative to 912 Cherry Hill Boulevard is not proceeding, and that takes us then to declarations of pecuniary interest. There being none, there are no notices of upcoming public meetings and open houses. And I can't recall the last time that happened. There are no public meetings this evening. And so that takes us to the consent agenda, where we have a couple of reports. One has to do with the American Water Works Association annual water loss audit, and the other deals with the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion work plan. Do I have a mover with respect to that? Councillor Lewis. Are there any questions or comments with respect to either of those reports? So I had a couple of questions, and that is with respect to the water loss. Some of it is unauthorized, which may or may not include theft. And if there is, what actions would we take relative to unauthorized taking of treated water? Mr. Walsh, can you answer that?
Yes, that you had mentioned that it doesn't really include theft. That's essentially is what it is unauthorized use is theft. So when we catch them, we have a number of mechanisms through our water bylaw to deal with that on a penalty basis. I'm a little surprised at the graphs, which show that there's a fairly consistent level of loss or unaccounted revenues that we don't receive for water, some of which we use, some of which is used by others.
some of which we know where it's going and some of which we don't. And it seems like there's a fair amount of treated water that we're paying for that actually we aren't being reimbursed for. Do we know whether, so is there an explanation why those numbers haven't gone down? Is it because the system is expanding, because we've got old pipes still that need to be replaced? Any comments, Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, if you look at Appendix 3, our real losses are about 60% of our billed authorized consumption. Real losses are essentially leaks in the water main. So notwithstanding, we are expanding the system. I think that the new parts of the system are very robust. They're made with PVC pipe and great gaskets and such. It's our older water mains, our cast iron and AC water mains that notwithstanding, we do leak detection surveys all year long with our fancy gizmos we've got hooked up to hydrants as well as special studies. We're just chasing ghosts out there, and a pinhole leak, you can't really hear it or trace it, but over the course of the year, you lose a great amount of water through that. So it's you'll see through our asset management plan tonight that we're behind on our infrastructure like every municipality is, but the losses are a function of our aging infrastructure.
So we do some zone metering, correct?
We do not do zone metering yet.
Okay, that's something that we've talked about for a while, I believe.
Right.
Is there some indication as to when that might be implemented? Because it seems to me that if we had zone metering, we would be able to, perhaps with greater precision, determine whether there are some areas where we may have some suspicions of losing water. That may help to fulfill a suspicion or confirm that it's not lost there.
We do not have plans in place to undertake that. We do have a plan to do that. The technical parts, we don't have the whole project laid out yet. Maybe apropos at this time to let council know that Chris Pasaric, our manager of water wastewater, and the author of this report, is retiring at the end of August, unfortunately. So one of the tasks of the new manager that comes in is take a look at this report and maybe put a fresh set of eyes on it. And as much as I agree with you, Mr. Mayor, that zone metering is a tool we can use, it won't eliminate or reduce lost water.
So there has to be a solution, because I don't think it's sustainable that we would be paying for 40% of the water that we're billed for, that we would not be recovering payment from users. That seems to be unsustainable, and that $1.8 million, if that's what the number is, seems to me a target that we could be going after, because if we spent 300 and saved 400, we're still getting ahead of the game. So I would hope that we come forward with some strategies where we can reduce that number.
Your comments are noted, Mayor.
Okay, thanks very much. Anyone else? Councillor Lewis.
Quick question. Of the roads that we're looking, or the pipe in the ground that we're looking, are there components of this that would be regional infrastructure in the ground? And how does that correlate with, if we're checking, are they checking?
Well,
How does that work?
well, that's an age-old question, and the reality is that we get billed when the water leaves the water treatment plant. So what happens in the regional trunk mains, I don't think we know, and I don't know that they're doing any monitoring, but Mr. Walsh would have a handle on that.
So, Mr. Mayor, when we hire a consultant every year to do an area of town on a very specific water loss basis. They try and find the leaks in a certain area. That does include all water mains, regional and town. I'd caution council not to chase that dog down the road too far with the region, as the magnitude of our water mains to theirs are vastly different. We are the bulk of the problem.
They have bigger water mains. But I hear what you say. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you. No, just wanted some.
Okay, anyone else? I'm going to call the question on the two reports. All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That takes us to Infrastructure Services, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. Infrastructure Services is now in session. We have one presentation today, which is Richard Pinder, who is making a presentation with respect to the asset management plan. So please feel free to come forward. I believe Cole has your presentation.
The town has embarked on a journey that's been special for myself. I've been afforded the opportunity to look at the town's information, our data, look at where we integrate, look at all the great things that we've been doing here, and more importantly, work with all the staff that have worked hard to kind of work through all the things asset management that we have to do here at the town. Presently, we're presenting a report on the state of our infrastructure as it is today. I just want everyone to bear in mind that there's still lots of work to do. You would draw your attention to some of the conversations you've had tonight about the water mains, and that the goal is to look to the future and to make better improvements, make better decisions, and improve our levels of service. So with that said, I'd like to bring GEI, Richard Pinder and Jen Gross to make the presentation on our 2024 asset management plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Your Worship, members of council, and town staff. Jen and I were both here a few weeks ago to introduce you to the asset management plan. This evening, we're here to present you the Town of Fort Erie's 2024 asset management plan. Our agenda this evening is as follows. We'll go through the asset management planning process. We'll understand the Ontario Regulation 58817, and then we'll jump into the Town of Fort Erie's 2024 asset management plan results. For our asset management planning process, there's 5 key steps that we take. The first is the state of the infrastructure. So this is really what the town owns. The value of the assets within the town. We look at the condition. So you have a full pictures of what you own, what it's worth, and what the condition of all your assets are. The second step is the level of service. So this is the performance of your assets. And Jen is going to get into a little bit more detail on the current and proposed. And I'll discuss it a little bit about how the OREG fits into this as well. The third step is the life cycle management strategies. So with the assets you have, there are things you must do to it to keep it in a condition and a performance to deliver the service. So we want to capture everything you do and look at things maybe we can improve upon, as well as maybe there might be things not being done. The fourth section is the financial strategy. So we look at your budgets, your both history as well as the forecast. We look at those costs of those life cycle activities and what it costs the town to be able to deliver that service. And then there are strategies that Jen will go through in understanding how we address any funding shortfalls that you may have. And of course, everything isn't perfect, so the last step within the asset management process is the improvement and monitoring process. So we can't always do everything we want, and asset management is really about continuous improvement. As Michelle mentioned, there's the past, there's current, as well as what we can do in the future. So in 2018, the province came out with the Ontario Regulation 58817. So this required all 444 municipalities within Ontario to follow this process. So in 2019, municipalities were required to have an asset management policy, and the town did their policy in 2019 to meet the regulation. In 2022, all municipalities were to meet the level of service for your core assets. So the core assets being your water, wastewater, roads, and bridges. The town made that presented their plan in 2019. For July 1st, 2024, all municipalities must address the level of service for all other assets. So that includes cemeteries, facilities, fleet, et cetera, all your other assets. In 2025 is the proposed level of service. So while your current level of service is what you will do today, the proposed is what you want to do in the future. So tonight we're presenting you with both the 2024 and 2025 asset management plan. So that's why you can see where you are here. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk about what assets were included in your asset management plan, and we'll walk through the process as well.
So the scope of your asset management plan, again, is all of your assets that the town owns. So they've been broken down according to your bridges and structures, roads, stormwater, wastewater, water, digital services, emergency services, facilities, fleet, parks and cemeteries, and natural assets. So you'll see within the document, you will see a chapter for each of these asset categories, and then more detailed information about their life cycle activities, their condition, everything that you need to know about that asset category can be found within that chapter. And then the financial strategy will pull that together at the end. So you did see this same table previously, but again, we just wanted to reiterate the changes from your last 2019 plan to today. So one of the contributing factors to your infrastructure gap is now that we're reporting on more assets, we have more information, and then especially the impacts of the past few years with COVID, replacement values increasing. There's been a large jump in the replacement values of your assets since the 2019 plan. So we've gone through with your staff and made a concerted effort to update these values. As again, if these values are not updated, your forecasts of what your needs are not going to be accurate. And if you had in your old system that a truck cost you $20,000 10 years ago, but now it's 80. Again, this all speaks to the reliability of your information and what your needs are. So the state of your infrastructure, so this is everything compiled together, where to get more detailed information, again, you'll see that all within the asset chapters, but you do have roughly 18% of your assets in very poor condition, as they're stated for this plan. So this information is based on the best available information. There are still some gaps in the information. Some of them are low-level assets that you probably wouldn't ever go get the condition information, but we want to make sure that it's all well documented of what we know and what we don't know. Overall, your assets are worth $2.16 billion. So again, that's a large jump from your last asset management plan. Your natural assets for this plan has been included as an appendix because there was a separate asset management plan done just for your natural assets, which was really fulsome and a very interesting read for me too, because not a lot of people are handling the natural assets well. Most municipalities have just included their trees as a natural asset, and there's still a lot of room to grow. So the fact that you guys went and did that engagement and got that all that updated information is really valuable. And so to continue to drill down into what that means for you guys. So your roads is your biggest contributor for your valuation, which is not surprising. You guys have a big land area. You have a lot of roads to reach people. So this is the asset condition broken down by the asset categories. Again, all this information has been provided within the asset category chapter. So we've broken it down here between your tax and your rate supported. So your core assets, as per the regulation, are your bridges and culverts or structures, your roads, storm, water, and wastewater. So we've kind of broken it down in both ways, just so that for information purposes, because the regulation does define between your core and non-core. So your facilities, fleet, all of that are considered non-core. And then again, natural assets isn't included in this graph because that was a separate engagement, but the information on your natural assets is within the appendix. So we wanted to put this up again as a refresher of why do we have an infrastructure gap. You guys have put so much extra work and money into funding the last asset management plan. You've done a lot of great things, but especially with the past few years, things have changed. Trucks are more expensive, roads are more expensive to install. So some of the contributing factors to your infrastructure gap is the high inflation rates, the impact of COVID on replacement values. We've updated all those replacement values to be reflective of those the other impacts. Updated condition assessments. Your last asset management plan was a great exercise to figure out what you don't know and where you needed improved information. Your staff have gone and collected updated information on storm, sanitary facilities. There's been a lot of work to get updated condition information, and they continue to progress in that. So that has, again, given us better information. And then setting proposed targets for the level of service, that's also contributed to your gap, where we're not just trying to maintain your assets in the condition they are now. We want to set targets of what should we be doing to our assets and what kind of services do we want to provide for our community. So we also have better improved asset information. So your last asset management plan, we weren't able to report on a lot of items because there was no information. So since that plan, we've gone and collected that information and included that here. And then also updating life cycle strategies. So this is also another big component where there's still work to do on your life cycle strategies and things that you can do and analyze to look at that gap in another light and things that you can do to lower that gap. So overall, annually, you have a $12.4 million infrastructure gap to meet your current levels of service, which is the dotted blue line on the graph. Your black line is your average anticipated budget based on your 10-year capital plan and your operating budget. And then the average annual infrastructure gap to meet your proposed level of service is that dotted red line. So in that 2024 year, you see a huge portion of red, so that's all your infrastructure needs. And that includes your backlog in that 2024 year. So that's any works that have been identified that should have already been completed. So it was very timely that that water loss report come and talk about all the work that needs to be done, because that your water system being older, past its useful life, cast iron pipes that are leaking, that would be all included in that 2024 bar. So of course you're not going to be able to address your whole backlog and all of the needs in that 2024 year. It's kind of meant to be there for shock to see how much work needs to be done. But we do average it out over the 10 years for a reason, because we understand you're not going to address that all in 1 year. But so we want to figure out roughly how much should you be spending. So if you break down your infrastructure gap by the asset categories, so this information is provided within the chapters of the very specific what is causing that gap, but then we've compiled it in the financial strategy so that you have a full picture of where are the priorities and what is causing that infrastructure gap. So your biggest gaps are for your water and wastewater and your stormwater. So those are all your pipes. So for your stormwater, you've gone and done a lot of work to collect condition information, where we're not just basing information on age anymore. We have actual condition information to tell you what what's happening with your system. The one thing that I do want to at least ease some of the pain of that number is there's still further work on this gap to figure out what some other options and life cycle activities that can be done to lower this gap. So what this graph is saying is, so for your stormwater, for instance, yes, it's a really big number, but that's assuming you're going to replace all of those assets. There are other options for relining a pipe, doing spot repairs that are going to improve the condition, give you extra life out of those assets, and are cheaper than replacing that pipe. But that is not something that is forecastable at this point. We have to make certain assumptions for this forecast, and that is going to be one of the options that your staff does look at every year when they do make the capital budgets of what work can we do and how else can we mitigate and control the risks, improve the condition, and do all of these things. So yes, it's a big, scary number, but there is still more work to be done. And as you guys go and mature through your asset management process, you're implementing your maintenance management software, you're doing all of the right activities to set you guys up that when we run these forecasts in the future, you're going to have more drilled down information, more accurate information. And again, it's an iterative process, and we're going to keep updating these processes, what our life cycle strategies are, how we forecast this information to be more accurate. So in terms of the conditions, so again, these same graphs are within each chapter, so you can see the specific graphs for an asset type, but this is all the compiled needs. So under the first scenario, if you just were looking to maintain your assets in approximately the same condition they are now, that's what the graph looks like. It's trying to keep your number of assets in very, very poor condition approximately the same with very good. So there is some ups and downs in there, but roughly your assets will just be maintained in approximately the same condition. So when we talk about the cost of maintaining that current level of service, that's the scenario that we're discussing, and you'll see that's what that cost is going to do for you. If scenario 2 is looking at your current funding, so again, this is looking at your 10-year capital budget of what are we anticipating to fund and what are we anticipating to spend on our assets. So we do look at your operations budget as well, and we average it out for what those needs are. So if you continue funding your assets at the level you are now, you see the impact to the condition of your assets. It doesn't look as scary in the graph, but you do see the increase from the first year of the scenario to the last year of the scenario, that portion in very poor has grown. And then if scenario 3 looks at your infrastructure needs, and which is what your staff have set that proposed level of service at, which we discussed. So if you follow your infrastructure needs and all those life cycle strategies that have been developed, that is the impact of the condition to your assets. So again, we're still not getting rid of everything in very poor condition, which is okay, and that's expected. You still have a cycle of things that will be nearing its end of life, but not necessarily at end of life. But you see a great improvement from your maintained current and your current funding level to the infrastructure need. So the strategies to close the gap, as discussed, there's still a lot of things that can be done that aren't just financial. So of course we can increase your reserves and reserve funds. So you will see in the document that there are recommendations to increase that reserve funding. Looking at debt financing, grant funding, of course, we're always going to recommend you continue to go after additional grant fundings, and then revenue increases or an infrastructure levy, user fees and charges. These are all options for you, which will be worked on with finance to determine what the appropriate course of action. But again, there's so many non-financial strategies to help you close that gap that aren't going to be put on the taxpayer, but as we mature through your asset management program, as you get better information, how we look at your pipes of which ones are candidates to be able to reline for cheaper options, there's so many different ways that we can continue to close that gap that doesn't involve money. So in terms of the improvement in monitoring plan. So again, staff have been working so hard on your AWOMS implementation for maintenance management, all of these different things that are continuing to work on. So they're going to continue to work on updating the asset registers and any data gaps that the town has, continue to update condition assessments and integrations with the AWOMS and asset registers. The implementation of all your new technology is going to help you as well. monitor this information, improve this information, come up with better life cycle strategies. Then also, there's work to be done for the reconciliation of your tangible capital asset reporting and the asset register, so you have one source of truth. And continue to enhance your life cycle management strategies, continue to review and update your current replacement values. Again, so much of this forecast is reliant on those updated replacement values, so we want to make sure you continue to look at these, update them appropriately, and same with the service lives. So a pipe has a specific service life. Make sure once you have better information and you can really analyze how long certain pipe materials are lasting, to continue to update this information to improve your forecasting. So future tasks are defining what asset failure means. So we don't want to, right now, the assumption is you're going to replace something at the end of its service life, but let's define how can we further prioritize. So a water main break, if you get to the end of that useful life, it's never had a water main break, and you have high confidence that it's still doing its job, how do we really want to define what it means that when that asset fails? Maybe we can keep that asset until it has had 5 breaks, or whatever that scenario looks like. So further defining what asset failure means so that we can come up with better forecasts and more improved forecasts. A truck, for an example. Do you want to replace a truck at the end of 10 or 12 or 15 years whenever you've said that service life? Or do we want to wait until it's costing us too much money in maintenance? Things like that will again drill down and give you an improved forecast to be able to really assess what your infrastructure gap is and kind of bring down that infrastructure gap. So we're we also recommended to update your tangible capital asset policy to be a little bit more in line with how you manage assets, continue to update your asset. So as part of the regulation, you have to do an annual update on asset management. So again, take that opportunity to look at your proposed level of service, what your targets are, update this information on state of the infrastructure and things that you're continuing to use this information and have it help you guide your budget process. And then also the integration of asset management within your budget process so that these plans and these forecasts are a much easier undertaking so you can continue to do them. So then also looking at an asset risk management strategy. So again, further prioritizing your high-risk assets and making decisions based on those. Include your natural assets into the town register now that you've got all this great information. Don't let it just sit on the shelf. Get it integrated with your asset register. Grow with it. And then also develop asset management goals and projects on based on an asset management maturity assessment. So further define where you want to go as an organization with asset management and help you plan those next steps of where the next maturity projects can happen. So at the end, you have a compliant plan for 2024 and 2025, and there will be further information following this plan. So the next steps, so following approval and endorsement of the 2024 plan, this plan will get posted on the town's website that is regulated, and then the town staff will further explore options to close the infrastructure gap, both non-financial and financial, and then council will receive an asset management update on an annual basis on the progress of implementing the asset management plan. All we've got. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, thank you for your presentation and nothing but good news, so I'll send it over to Councillor Dubanow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and yeah, good news all around for sure. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you when you were here before as well. We had an opportunity to have some, after discussion as well, which was very helpful for me. I'm just wondering if you could go back to the slide that showed the scary numbers, showing the, I speak facetiously, of course.
I don't have a button. Can I just,
Good point.
There we go.
The one with the graphs, not that one right there. Thank you. The one that showed the real scary number for 2024, including the backlog. Now, my question is related. I see here we have two dotted lines. We have one that's in blue, which would be to maintain our current level of service. We have a red one, which is higher, which is to have a proposed level of service. I'm just wondering, during the course of this process, was there any discussion, and I'm going to speak about it more later during the report stage to outline my thought process here, but were there any discussions about, not that I like saying this, but just considering the numbers we're dealing with, was there any discussion about reducing level of service or doing anything like that where it makes sense? I'm just wondering if that discussion had come up at all.
So there's definitely been conversations about that. As you guys look at this number, because it was decided the infrastructure needs should be the target, whether or not it's big or scary, because if we are to properly maintain our assets, ultimately doing so is actually the lowest cost. So for the example of a road, if you don't resurface that road, which is an improvement on that section of road, and if you say, instead of spending $200,000, we're like, let's wait, let's just let that road keep getting worse. Instead of the $200,000 project, once the surface is gone, you've ruined the base of the road, you've done, you can't save it anymore. And now you have to fully reconstruct that road. So now instead of $200,000, it's a $2 million project. So while yes, big and scary, that's kind of the point of the communication is, yes, these numbers are big and scary, and the more that you just kick the problem down the road and don't fund at certain levels, that number could get worse. And even if you lower that, you're just pushing those needs down the road. So it was an important communication tool to see that big scary number. But then that's why you have the opportunity on an annual basis to review that. Staff are going to continue to review the options to bring that number down, where once we determine some extra life cycle activities that we can do that may be cheaper than what the forecast was able to do, you're still going to be doing your ideal infrastructure needs, but the cost to do so will come down as you kind of progress in your asset management maturity.
Councillor Dubanow?
No, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Excellent answer, by the way, and I really appreciate the work you've done. I'm going to have some more comments about the reality of what we're facing later tonight when the report comes up, but I appreciate your presentation and the work you've done. Thank you very much.
Councillor Christensen?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you very much for this presentation and the report. Yeah, fascinating. Could you go to slide 13, please? I wanted to ask a little bit more because the financial complexities are things that we have an excellent finance department, and I would like to ask some questions about the non-financial. So aside from the asset prioritization and the levels of service targets, I'm looking specifically, I guess, at advocacy, community engagement, long-term planning. What kinds of functions or tasks or activities would fall within those? And where are they perhaps functions that council must act on and things that staff must act on?
Through you, Chair. So advocacy is something everybody can do. Council members, if you're engaging with the upper levels of government, engaging them for more funding, those are all things that can be done. It's both a combination of council sometimes does that when you go to your AMO conferences and all that stuff. You guys are there as representatives talk to the ministers, tell them your needs, help advocate for your town. Staff also are always doing that and looking for opportunities for funding. So that's kind of what it means by the advocacy piece, where it is a group activity, I guess you'd say, and a group effort to make sure that, you know, the voice of the town of Fort Erie is being heard at all levels. So it's very important. All municipalities are crying for money right now, doing those engagements with the upper levels of government to continue to be heard, because we don't want you guys being forgotten, and it's an important piece and it's an important role for both staff and council. Community engagement, that's something that the regulation wants you to start to bring into and engaging the community more so that they, understand why their taxes go up, why we need to spend the money, have an understanding of how much a road costs and how much it costs to do all of these services that they want. Everybody wants the Mercedes and, you know, the high-level assets, but when it comes down to tax time, they don't want to pay for it. So the more that the community understands, and it might just be posting more information on the website, maybe having some, you know, different things on your Bang the Tables site if you have one, or there's a lot of different options there. But it's also possible that if you involve the public, once you actually have the data to say, oh, the public wants this, but it turns out they don't want to pay for it, so they might accept a lower level of service. You still have to take that with a grain of salt because there's still increased risks if you let things fall. So, you know, but I think having that understanding from the public will help this process and help you at budget time too, that they understand the true cost of what it means to provide all the services that the town provides.
Councillor Christensen?
Thank you.
Any other, or Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Through you to the delegation. Thank you for your presentation. Granted, I hear this is not necessarily a good news story, but the good news part of it is that we were, about 2 years ago, we had the infrastructure gap. There wasn't any infrastructure gap 2 years ago. We had met that criteria. So that helps us. The gap's now there. It was gone 2 years ago, because I remember we actually went to AMO and said, we don't have an infrastructure gap. We've planned well. So that helps us now as we're moving forward, does it not? That's the good news part of it.
Through you, Chair. Honestly, if you hadn't done as much as you had since the last plan, this gap would be much larger. I know it sounds awful, but your gap doesn't scare me, doesn't keep me up at night, because I know there's a lot of work that can be done still without financially, that we can close that gap a little bit more. The infrastructure gap in the last plan was also calculated completely differently, and it was more of a financial exercise and looking at a reinvestment rate, because you didn't have a lot of good information on the condition of your assets. So now with all this extra information, and then plus, so there's a lot of contributing factors now, not just the extra cost of the assets, but your reserve policy, all of these things that have been done are very good compared to a lot of municipalities. So it has put you in a much better spot than a lot of municipalities.
Councillor Noyes?
Thank you. One further question. In regards to natural assets, and I don't know which slide it was where the pyramid with the infrastructure at the top and it kind of went down like this. I couldn't find the number on that page for some reason, because I can't see, there's not a number on that page. That's why I couldn't find it. Okay, and I said that we've put in natural assets. It wasn't in the last asset management plan. It's new. So I'm just wanting to clarify what exactly are the natural assets. I know it's probably the waterfront, climate resiliency, the shoreline, our trees and forested areas. What else is included in that?
Through you, Chair, I'm going to leave that one to Michelle because we weren't responsible for that engagement, so I don't want to misspeak.
Through your worship, all of what you just said was included. Stormwater ponds, or trees that are within the town's right-of-way, our shoreline and the waterfront. So pretty much all that you've just said is what's included in our natural assets.
Okay, does that include climate resiliency?
When you look at natural assets, it does take into account what they can offer to help us with climate resiliency. So the work is going to be to link those things together and see the information that we've gathered, how we can improve or make better what we're currently doing to help us with our climate resiliency or adaptation.
Okay, thank you.
Or mitigation. Thank you.
Your worship.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation and the information. It's gripping, and I'm relieved, Ms. Grossi, you're not losing any sleep over our asset management plan. You can leave that to us. Since Michelle is there, is there an opportunity for natural assets to be utilized to help us with some of the infrastructure going forward? So, as an example, other than roads, the storm system is the largest infrastructure asset that we have. So are there ways going forward that we can make better use of natural assets in order to deal with drainage, as an example?
Through your worship, thank you for that question. Yes, so in some cases, we have begun to do some of that work by our stormwater pond management facility collection and how we've developed those specifications as we are required to. We will further look at I&I, we'll further look at drainage, we'll further look at trees and how they can help with mitigation with heavy rainfall and so on. So there's more work to be done. We still have more studies to do to kind of figure out what of those natural assets we can use in a better way to mitigate some of our climate issues.
Thank you. If I might share, with respect to levels of service, we've been opening up a lot of parks in this town in the last several years, and we've been spending a lot of money with respect to parks. So this question really is to the consultants. When you talk about levels of service, and one of the ways that we can reduce the infrastructure gap, I presume that investing less in new infrastructure would be a way to help us, at least in the long run. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I think having this information is meant to give you, this is the hard facts about what you currently own, and if we're not able to catch up with what we currently own, yeah, let's evaluate where we're spending on new. And then better understanding too that when you do say yes to a new asset, understand that it eventually needs to be replaced, it needs maintenance, it needs a lot of things throughout its life cycle to maintain that, and it's not just that initial construction cost. You should start saving for its eventual replacement and what it needs to what it needs for maintenance.
Yeah, and I don't think it's in your report, and you didn't make a reference to it, but in the staff report, there's a reference to phase servicing. And to me, that means trying to get a handle on what's being serviced when. And as growth is occurring, should we be resisting the expansion of our underground infrastructure to areas where it doesn't exist now, when there are areas within the town where it does exist, and that's maybe where development should be taking place? Would that be phase servicing in your mind?
Do you want to answer that, David?
Through your worship, I will answer that question. Yes, to some degree. If you build it, they will come. If there's a development happening somewhere and we are required to provide that servicing, then you look at the development charges, you look at all that impacts, all those impacts at that time. You still have to take care of what you have currently. in the system because it's already old, it already needs replacing, and that those systems need to be looked at. We didn't have any information on our storm system, so now we do. When development comes, you still have to implement a stormwater pond, you have to do all those things that are required for there, and then you still have to plan once they are assumed by the town that those things need serviced. So those decisions are going to have to be up to council and yourselves on where and how you want to spend that money now and how you're going to recoup those costs to take care of those assets. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I'm thinking as you're speaking, and I'm thinking of we had a recent development that has accelerated, or will very well may accelerate construction of infrastructure into an area that's going to be serviced. It's only going to, the new infrastructure is going to serve one area. That's a cost that we're going to be bearing. It's going to be somewhat reimbursed through development charges at some point. But that adds to the inventory. And that means that, as the director would say, well, it's new infrastructure, so the costs of maintaining it are low today, and maybe for the next 10, 15, 20 years. But at some point, and we're looking at a horizon, I presume, of decades when we talk about an asset management plan, are we not?
Yes, we are. So I want to equate it to having a vehicle. So we've bought a new car, and at some point you have to do oil changes. And at some point you're going to have to buy winter tires. You're going to have to make those changes every summer and winter to switch those tires around. So it's the same thing when you assume an asset. It's new, it's working well, but you have to do the things to keep it going well, because just like when you buy a car, if you don't change the oil, at some point the engine's going to blow up, no matter how new the car is. So this is what happens when you assume new assets. They're in great shape for the time being, but there's things you have to do. You have to flush the pipes when they need flushing. You have to clean them, clean the stormwater ponds at some point. And there are things that are set in place, schedules for what those needs are for those assets and that infrastructure.
Thank you.
So,
Just
yes.
a couple more questions. I know all municipalities are required to meet these, the regulations, requirements with respect to asset management plans, financing, et cetera. Who determines whether or not the plan that a municipality adopts is acceptable or is going to be sustainable? Who determines that?
Through you, Mayor. That's a great question. So I think when they put out the regulation, there has been a lot of surveys going on right now, because I think they recognize that although the ministry had great intentions for this, of being able to compare apples to apples, they've realized they really can't, and how people determine replacement values and everything. So I think there probably likely will be some updates to the regulation in the future to be possibly more clear. At this point, nobody's actually coming back and reviewing this plan, making sure it meets all the requirements. You are required to have this plan to go to try to get grant funding, and they will ask you when you do all those surveys and processes to get grant funding, they will ask you if you have an asset management plan that conforms to the regulation, if it's up on the website. At this point, there's nobody coming back to check. There's been talk about somebody coming to audit them. At this point, it hasn't happened yet.
So we could adopt any level of service for any amount of money, and that might not be prudent in terms of sustaining our assets, but we wouldn't be penalized, would we, by the province?
No.
Anything further? Your worship?
No, I'm going to lose some sleep for you tonight.
And any other questions from anyone who hasn't spoke before I go to Councillor Christensen again? Seeing none, Councillor Christensen.
Picking up on the mayor's original question with respect to extending and expanding new infrastructure into new areas, for example, areas that previously were not within the urban boundary, as an example. In your opinion, your professional opinion, if we are looking at the core infrastructure and for lack of a better word, the non-core, which happens to include emergency services and facilities. Is it correct that we should be taking paying very close attention in prioritizing to the non-core ancillary needs that come out, that result from the fact that there is available infrastructure, available development, newly planned development that is currently within our purview versus expansion beyond what we've had up to date, if you get what I'm talking about. So it's paying attention. So we're going to have to prioritize core versus non-core. We're going to have to prioritize or discuss the prioritization of new applications, new potential infrastructure burdens, and within the light of the fact that non-core needs of previously existing or older secondary plan designations will create those non-core needs. If you get, I don't know. Do you get what I'm saying?
Through the chair,
Yeah.
I will do my best. So in terms of growth, yes, we do need to consider what the impact is of new developments. There are ways to make sure that growth is paying for growth. So when you update your rate study, when you update your development charges, there's a reason you do that, to make sure that you're assessing what do we actually need to pay for when we have new developments, what is the long-term impact, so that when you figure out what your development charges need to be, you're setting appropriate rates. Same with your rate study for water, wastewater. Are you setting rates appropriately to recover money? And then also consider, if you don't grow your core infrastructure to these new areas, you now won't have the benefit of the new tax revenue. So hopefully your new tax revenue, it kind of balances out and the core infrastructure's not too bad. Like you're through those new revenue streams, you're considering that. And that's where the asset management planning is so important, to make sure you are following that and you understand what the needs are, you understand what those long-term impacts, so then when you do update your rate studies and all of that, you have the proper information to say, this is what the needs are, this is what the long-term impact's going to be if we add these things. So considering then what the impact is on facilities and parks, and that's where setting those levels of service are important, where if you know you want to provide so many parks per so many residents. So if you have a development, it's going to add 1,000 residents, you already know, because you've set a level of service, that we're going to need a new park if we add 1,000 residents. So you again have a better understanding of what those needs are and what those long-term impacts. And that's where asset management really starts to grow into not just engineering, not just finance, it's in planning, it should be included in all of these conversations that you're having about growth and about also maintaining and trying to find that right balance.
That's where I was trying to get to. Thank you.
And if I may add to that, through you, Mayor, and we've talked about a little bit here, is that capital infrastructure, or that initial capital, is somewhere between 20-30% of its asset life cycle. And that seems like a huge number, but in reality, 60-70% of it is the ongoing O&M cost to get it to that 30, 40, 50 years that you need. So while that's always a huge number, that capital, think of what Michelle mentioned, of all the things you must do to your car after you get it. Sure, the $40,000 is huge up front, but over the next 15 years, you've spent more than that amount of money on your vehicle with gas and tires and oil changes, et cetera, so.
I'm looking at 50 years, so, yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? Being none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
So that brings us now to report IS 05-2024, Luker. Your worship. And do you have a question, Councillor Dubanow?
It's more of a comment, Mr. Chair, more than anything else. Just kind of going back to the question that I had asked during the presentation about service level. I recognize that these are challenging times. You know, we've got, we're at a point right now of high interest rates. Inflation has been high, seems to be leveling off, but it's certainly at a level higher than what we've experienced before. This is more of a comment just rhetorically kind of about my mindset and where we go in the budget process. I think there's a reality to what we can do and the amount that we can spend. Because when it comes down to it, you know, we're talking about the taxpayers of the town, and there's only so much available. I mean, we've got, you know, rents are high, interest rates are high, so mortgage costs are high. You know, put property taxes on there, you know, you're getting the triple whammy there with everything going on. And then the municipality has to pay for these things. Like the mayor is right, you know, these are things that keep me up at night too, wondering how do we balance all these needs of our community together and find a way to make it work. So I'm concerned, but at the same time, I also understand that we're not the only municipality in this boat. And arguably, we're probably in a much better boat than most municipalities in this province are. I've mentioned it in the past, but when we met Minister Surma at AMO in 2019, we mentioned that at that time our asset management plan was almost fully, or it wasn't Minister Surma, it was the Deputy Minister, my apologies, but we had mentioned that that our asset management plan was almost fully funded, and their heads just flung right up from whatever they were reading because they were so shocked that a mature municipality of this age had achieved that. So as much as I'm concerned, as much as I look at these numbers, I do know that we have done this before. We have fantastic staff. We have, you know, we've had good leadership through multiple councils even prior to my time here. It's been a real team effort. I want everyone to understand that, you know, we're talking dollars and cents here. I open up my property tax bill just like everyone else, and I look at it and I say, my God, how am I going to afford this? So when I look at these costs and everything, my thought is, you know, the affordability for families is always top of mind. But at the same time, I have to look at the affordability. You can't kick that can down the road either onto our children and make it unaffordable for them either. So there are a lot of competing interests here. I want residents to understand that. I want staff to understand that. That's kind of my thought process right now. Those were the comments. And that's why I mentioned level of service, because, you know, there's a reality to what we can afford, what we can pay for. And as long as we have those discussions and move forward and we do it in a transparent way, I think we can, at the very least, get something working out to kind of move us in that direction that we were back in 2019. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, giving me the opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. In regards to some of the questions in regards to new assets that perhaps we had not planned for, or the timeline for the new asset was way down the road, but we're being faced with it currently. I'm just wondering, and I know this is going to come on when we get the next report in regards to financial avenues that we can go to, is that will we be also considering our debt financing? In other words, I know we've always prided ourselves. I'm not saying you go into debt and, you know, because that you have to pay back. I understand that, and there's costs involved. But I think if my memory serves me, we're quite low right now. I think at 3% or 4% or something, and we can go as high as 25%. I think we're one of the better municipalities in regards to what our debt is, and I know we have to I understand the tax stuff. So I'm just wondering if that's going to be something that's going to be considered as an option, because then we can perhaps recoup the costs when the development actually occurs. Well, no, I think that's, well, they can, yes, sure, if Councillor, if, yeah, if the director,
I'll just make a quick comment through you, Councillor Lewis. Essentially, everything's on the table. Debt is certainly one of the tools we have at our disposal. Typically, it's been used for new assets in the past. I think when we come back with our supplemental report on how to address our spending gaps, debt will be something that's considered, yes.
Thank you through the chair to Councillor Noyes. Just in extension to Mr. Walsh's comments, but also the presenter, if you recall the slide that they had up, identified a number of different financial considerations. So we would be bringing back some financial analysis around things like debt, reserves, the capital levy, user fees, grants, a number of other financial tools. But I think on the other side of the non-financial tools, certainly it's an ongoing exercise for our staff to look for new technologies and modern technologies. Some of the natural asset work that's happened has identified natural assets in other communities that reduce whether operating impacts or environmental impacts that will reduce some of our exposure going forward, things like geothermal, heat recovery, rain gardens, new technology around on-site servicing as opposed to conventional servicing for water and wastewater. And so some of those technologies are available in our own community. So looking at things like that, and in some cases, making investments on the capital side that would reduce our operating impacts. So some of the installations we'd be looking at in the hopes, and Mr. Walsh referred to some of them in the earlier report with the water audit, but things like smart meters that help us to identify or isolate in a much more immediate fashion where the leaks might exist, helps us to save on the operating side because we are able to tackle the problem sooner and we're not spending more money on the operating side. So, and fuel efficiency and energy efficiencies and those types of things are all things we would be looking at as we're bringing a report forward, both at the budget and also the financial strategy for next July.
Councillor Noyes?
thank you for that, and I did anticipate that answer, that there's a lot of things we can look at to see how we can manage the costs that we're going to incur as we go forward. I'm just curious, just throwing it out there, that zero program that we're talking about, the red lights and the thing, we're supposed to get a percentage of the money collected. I'm just really curious if that's going to be, I wouldn't say significant, but that's obviously going to be money that we haven't had in the past, that we may have in the future. We're not there yet. I'm seeing people shake their head. I know when the report came out, it was supposed to be a moneymaker for the municipality. I know that very, very clear. We can remember that. Okay, so I'm hearing not much, but okay, I can remember the promises made, the pie in the sky, and it was going to be, we were going to lower taxes because of it was going to make us so much, it was generate so much income. I'm being facetious here. Anyway, so I'm just wondering that I see the director laughing there. There was a lot of promises made when the zero program was introduced in regards to revenue that we were going to generate. And from I see from the smiles and stuff, that's probably not going to be happening. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a couple of comments. The Zero Vision was any money that it does make was supposed to go back into making the streets safe, so that it wouldn't be any profits on that wouldn't have an impact whatsoever on infrastructure asset management. In terms of our infrastructure gap, it was 2022, and it was the Minister of Infrastructure that we told we had met the infrastructure gap, and she was quite surprised, and she still comments on it whenever we see her. So that, in context, that's an indication that at that time, Fort Erie was perhaps on its own. I did have a few questions before I made some general comments, and the first question was, the beginning of the report, and I did ask Ms. Moore about this, there's a reference to the priority, page 1, priority sustainable and managed growth initiative, developing a strategy to accommodate growth through phased servicing. So what does that mean? And I know what Ms. Moore said. I'd like to get an understanding maybe from the director as to what that means, either director of infrastructure or director of planning or both.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Mayor, you had spoke about building where there's infrastructure instead of building outside of infrastructure. That's exactly, to me, what it means. Intensification for build on vacant lots or tear down old buildings rather than put up new facilities. If you don't own it, or if it's not an asset, you don't have to look after it. The more assets you build, the more assets you have to look after. When Councillor noted about our plethora of parks and the equipment within it, a change in level of service there, for instance, would be not replacing a playground and turning it into a more passive park to suit the neighborhood in some instances. Items like that, that's everything is on the table right now.
Okay, that maybe went a step further than my question.
Sorry.
But I would tend to agree with that, and so I think it's important that we try to align our planning policies and our infrastructure policies so that we don't get caught agreeing to things that are going to happen, that are going to create more problems for us sooner rather than later. Second question I had, and I'll go past the condition of the water lines because I've already, obviously that's a serious issue, and there's savings to be had if we know what to spend money on, just like we're doing with the storm water management system, where we're working on manhole covers, and that's going to save us money in the long run. But I did want to go to, in terms of sewer infrastructure, we've been required to put holds on some of the properties in the Garrison Road vicinity. And we've had our consultants taking a look at some of these developments that have been put on hold. And we're looking at the infrastructure, some of which would be regional, but mostly I think it's ours. Where are we with respect to those holds?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rob Judd is just finalizing the memo, the technical background memo on that. We expect, and I've given him direction in my vacation absence to have two properties addressed, two of the three properties addressed with a formal memo by weekend.
So we should know next week what the status of those holds are.
Certainly, yes.
Okay, thank you. In terms of, we have a grants committee, and I'm presuming that they're continuing to pursue any opportunities associated with infrastructure projects, like the combined sewer overflow program, et cetera. Can we get an update on that or confirmation of that?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was having a brief discussion with Anamika here on the
CAO
holds.
may be the better person to answer that.
So I'm going to ask you to repeat the question because I thought,
We have a grants committee, and the grants committee, I presume, is continuing to search high and low for grants that might assist us with respect to infrastructure renewal. Yeah, I presume it's still ongoing.
so yeah, we do have a grants committee. We do meet quite regularly, and there's quite a lot of traffic, particularly as of late with some of the new funding opportunities with the housing-enabled infrastructure money and a number of other funding opportunities that have come forward through FCM, Green Municipal Fund. So we regularly communicate those and have a constant monitoring of the programs, the deadline dates, assigning project leads to make submissions, and the departments have been very responsive, and I think it's part of the reason why we've had fairly significant success with grants coming into the town, is that approach, that regular discipline of looking at those funding opportunities, and we do continue to do that, and will continue to do that. Seems to be having some success.
Thank you. And then the final question I had before I make comment is, when we look at levels of service for with respect to this asset management plan, I presume that we can adopt different levels of service for different categories. Is that correct?
So I'll take this, Mr. Chair. Yes, every asset category can have a different level of service. Our fleet, on one of the slides that GEI threw up, you'll see has what looks like a very bad condition rating. Almost half of the assets are in bad condition. The way we rate our fleet is by age. And if it's reached the end of its service life, it has a 0 rating, essentially. Even though it's still on the road, and due to our good maintenance practices, we can keep it a couple of years longer. So how does that relate to different assets with different conditions?
Yeah,
I've kind of talked in a circle. The answer is yes. We can have a 75 for roads, but we can have an 80 for fleet, for instance, and still meet the required needs of the town.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of levels of service, we would simply change based on experience and based on the vehicles. We might change when it is we have to replace them. And that would be
Correct.
a change in our current level of service. It would be, and that would have an impact on what this graph looks like when it talks about the state of the infrastructure. So by spending no money, but by critically analyzing and changing the level of service, we actually improve the condition.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes, correct.
So then, let me just, I think the provincial government that decided that municipalities should get a handle on their infrastructure did a good thing. And they did a good thing because in all my experience in municipal government, I know that for the first 15 or 20 years of that experience, the easiest way to try to come in with an acceptable budget was don't spend money on your infrastructure. And aside from the roads, nobody could see it, and nobody really paid much attention to things like level of service. So at least the governments have made municipalities come to grips with what it is they have in terms of assets to serve the public, and how much those assets are worth, and how much it's going to cost to maintain them over a period of time in a condition that will permit the municipality to continue to provide the services that the residents need. So that's good. It would be better if there were stricter rules with respect to what municipalities have to do, and it would be better if the provincial government actually recognized that this is a problem that municipal taxpayers are not going to resolve on their own. This is a problem that we're not going to be spending $300 and something million to pay for all of these assets on our own. I think the provincial government recognizes that. I think the problem is they're not prepared to recognize how much money they're going to need to contribute. They have much larger ability to fund these types of projects, and they're the ultimate beneficiaries because we cannot serve our residents or be commercially competitive unless we have the assets and the infrastructure that we need. I look at this as one of those deals where previous taxpayers didn't have to pay the share of maintaining the infrastructure that current taxpayers are going to have to pay. And if we don't meet these obligations now, we're only further burdening future taxpayers. And so we're at a point where we have to make these decisions and we have to do this. I'm thankful that for at least a decade, more than a decade, councils before ours have decided that they're going to put money into the infrastructure. So this started, I think, around 2012, where there was a serious effort to start putting money into reserves in order to meet these needs, and we've continued that. We've increased the amount of money we spend on our roads, and the graph that shows the state of infrastructure is clear. I mean, we have, our roads are in excellent shape. There would be some roads that obviously need some work, but by and large, we have very few roads that are in a poor condition. Our bridges and culverts are in excellent condition. We have some large areas, the fleet is one where maybe levels of service adjustment will affect that. Emergency services, I'm not exactly sure. Those are the smaller infrastructure capital funds that would be necessary to bring these up to an acceptable level right across. Stormwater management, that's the one that fascinates me. It's, we have, who would have thought that we have that much in the way of stormwater management assets? And I really believe that we have opportunities here to be looking at our natural assets to try to take some of the burden off of that. And I think, hopefully this will provide us with the opportunities to do that. So, I'm, with all due respect, I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep about this. I've seen this coming. We've all seen this coming. We know it's here. There are no hammers that are going to come down. The only thing that makes us follow this process and make sure that we put money into our infrastructure is because we want to make sure that our residents have what they need, the services that they require, and that we can be commercially competitive along with whatever other communities are competing with us. So we're going to do it because it's the right thing for us to do. And we've been fortunate that we've had previous councils that have also felt it was the right thing to do. So I'm going to support this. I'm looking very much forward to how we go through this process. I'm interested in levels of service, and I'm interested in how we're going to be able to generate the funding to make sure that we can meet this. We might have to borrow some money at some point. That may be necessary to the extent that we have to. But so far, we've been given excellent advice by our staff over the years, and I'm counting on us to continue to get good advice. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Just wanted to make a few statements, comments on some of the things I heard. Making the streets safe with the Vision Zero is asset management. I just wanted you to know, because hopefully we will have enough money when we start looking at traffic calming, that there will be some money coming from Vision Zero to assist us with it, because traffic calming is not necessarily cheap. And I think that would fit that. The other thing, the only concern I have when we talk about perhaps looking at I know it was just a suggestion, just an idea. I don't say it's etched in concrete or anything, but I strongly discourage that we're looking at taking our active parks and making them into passive parks, because the pendulum is swinging to the fact that we're actually going to need more active parks because the properties are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The density is getting higher and higher and higher, so the needs for active parks are going to increase, not decrease. So that would not be a place that I would support. So those are my two thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just going back to the comment earlier that the mayor had, or the question the mayor had raised about the infrastructure issues in the east end of town, and the information that Mr. Walsh had provided, and I'm very thankful for the information. I've had communication with him as well regarding this. I'm just wondering if if there is any information that comes before our next council meeting or anything, if it's possible just to maybe flip council an email or something, just with some information. It's an issue that I continually hear about in that end of town, and I'm just wondering, the sooner that information's available, if council could be provided with that, that would be fantastic.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lewis. That takes us to Planning and Development Services, Councillor Christensen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Planning and Development Services Subcommittee meeting is now in session. We have a presentation this evening. Kimberlyn Smith, the Junior Community Planner, item 10.1.1. She's going to speak to the heritage property designation.
To the Municipal Heritage Standing Committee. Established by Council in 2012, the committee advises Council through staff on properties they recommend for designation under the Ontario Heritage Act. The committee is recommending the designation of 487 Niagara Boulevard, 45 Princess Street, 168 High Street, and 400 Holloway Bay Road South. 487 Niagara Boulevard, built around 1792, is located directly across from the shore of the Niagara River. It is surrounded by 1 to 2.5-story residential structures typical of the late 19th and early 20th century architectural style. The property carries significant historical significance, closely linked to the Wintemute family known for their wartime contributions. Initially constructed as a Regency-style cottage, it stands as one of Fort Erie's earliest homes. Although the property has undergone substantial modifications, evolving into a craftsman-style residence, the key heritage attributes include the form of the original 1792 structure and its location near Wintemute Street. The report completed by ARA was provided to the owners by email on May 1st, 2024. They were also notified by registered mail that the Heritage Committee was recommending the designation of their property, and the presentation of the report would be scheduled for July 8th. The property's owners were informed about the public open house organized by the town but did not attend. Instead, staff had a phone conversation with the owners during which information about the incentive programs, heritage permits, and procedural aspects of designation was provided. Located in Fort Erie's residential area near the historic core, 45 Princess Street was constructed between 1858 and 1861 as a 2-story brick Italianate-style residence for William Stockdale, an early resident of Bertie Township. The property at 45 Princess Street has notable heritage attributes, including its red brick exterior and stone foundation. The design features a symmetrical facade and side elevations, complemented by a hip roof with wide eaves. Key architectural elements include its elliptical arch window openings, rectangular windows, and the arch formal entryway. This report completed by ARA was provided to the owners by email on May 1st, 2024. They were also notified by registered mail that the Heritage Committee would be recommending the designation of their property and that the presentation would be scheduled for July 8th. Although they missed the public open house, the owners showed interest in attending the council meeting for more details. Staff responded by email offering support to answer any questions but did not receive a response. However, the owners have not expressed any opposition so far. 168 High Street, positioned at the intersection of High Street and Bertie Street, features a 1.5-story Queen Anne-style residence. Built between 1888 and 1891, originally the property included a significant front lawn. However, this area has since been divided, and it is important to clarify that the designation does not encompass the adjacent properties on Bertie Street identified as 113, 109, and 105. The heritage attributes of this property include an asymmetrical facade and side elevations characteristic of Queen Anne style homes. Built on a rubble stone foundation, the structure follows a distinctive 1.5-story T-shaped floor plan. The roof features cross gables with gable dormers, adding to its visual interest and functionality. The report from Erie was sent to the owners by email on May 1st, 2024. Additionally, they were informed that the committee would be recommending their property for designation, and the report would go to council on July 8th. Although the owners did not attend the public open house, staff spoke with them last week to address their questions, and they did not indicate any opposition to the designation. Additionally, I did want to point out that there is an error noted on page 2, paragraph 4 of the report, where it incorrectly states that the heritage property evaluation conducted by the Heritage Committee scored 45 Princess Street at 132. This reference to the wrong address does require clarification. The score of 132 actually pertains to 168 High Street and not Princess Street. 400 Holloway Bay Road South spans approximately 25 acres along Lake Erie, featuring multiple structures, including a 2.5-story Queen Anne-style house built between 1871 and 1891. The heritage attributes of the structure include its overall height, scale, massing, and which is characterized by a 2.5-story Queen Anne-style home. The building features an irregular floor plan, a hip roof complemented by a lower cross gable roof and projecting gable ends. The exterior is embellished with decorative shingles, an oriel window, and horizontal wood cladding. The property owners were notified multiple times via registered mail. Staff informed them about the property's inclusion on the register, details regarding the open house, and the schedule for presenting the report to council. While all registered mail was confirmed as successfully delivered, staff have not received any communication from the property owners. The town offers 2 incentive programs for owners of designated properties. The first program is the Heritage Tax Rebate Program. This program offers a refund of up to 40% of the taxes imposed for municipal, regional, and school purposes based on the assessed value of the property up to a maximum assessed value of $500,000. The second program offered provides a grant of up to 50% of eligible costs to an upset limit of $10,000 for work performed to the identified heritage features and attributes of a designated property. Applications are reviewed by staff in consultation with the Heritage Committee, and approval is delegated to the Director of Planning and Development Services. If council recommends designation, staff will prepare the notice of intent to designate for publication in the local newspaper and to serve to the property owner and the Ontario Heritage Trust. Property owners have appeal rights under the Ontario Heritage Act. After publication, there is a 30-day period for objections. If council decides to proceed, they must pass a bylaw within 120 days of the notice of publication. After council adopts the bylaw, there's a 30-day appeal period for objections to be served to the municipality and the OLT. If no objections are received, a formal notice of passing will be issued and the designation bylaw will be registered on title. All property owners have also been provided this information. This concludes staff presentation. If you have any questions, I'm available.
Councillor Dubanow.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and through you to Ms. Smith, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. I always look forward to these. Just wanted to, again, you had mentioned this, but just to confirm, we didn't receive any outright objection from any of these property owners who said, no, I do not want designation. It was basically just no one flat out said no. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Dubanow, I have not received any no's.
And if I may, Madam Chair, and with respect to the Holloway Bay property, I know you had mentioned that there was registered letters sent out, but there was like no communication that had come back that said anything otherwise. You had mentioned that there were multiple registered letters. Between the time we started communicating with the owner of the property and sending those letters out, about how much time had passed that would have given them the opportunity to raise objection if they wanted to?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Dubanow, the first letter was sent January 13th of 2023. The next one was sent May 1st of this year, and then the final one was May 23rd of this year.
So we're talking at least a year and a half then?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor Christensen, to Kimberly. Thank you for your presentation. I have a few questions, and it kind of goes on what Councillor Dubanow said, that we didn't receive any no's for the 4 properties we have now. And I think you did clarify for 168 High Street that we did receive a telephone call, a contact that said yes, they're all for it. And I think 168 came before this council a while ago where the whole property was going to be designated, and the developer had a concern that he was okay with the house, but he wasn't okay with the property, and I see that that has been worked out, so that's great. But in regards to not getting any yes, I'm concerned, and I'm just wondering how we can get there in regards to either getting a definite yes, which I think you probably will get, or a no, because if they appeal it, but I guess the council can kind of, if they come back and say, no, I don't want it, the council can change their minds and say, okay, we're taking you off the designation. But I'm just wondering if there's other ways besides letters. You said you called 168 High Street. If there's other ways to contact these owners to make sure that we're on the same page.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Noyes, we have contacted the owners by email, phone, and letter, wherever the information is available. We're working with our Municipal Heritage Committee to address certain attributes and figure out where people are kind of hesitant towards designation. We've been able to work with a few owners and take the attributes off as long as they're not affecting the criteria to be designated, and that's kind of helping individuals be more open to designation.
Okay, but the 4 that are before us, with the exception of Hill Street, High Street, you haven't had those discussions with those 4, there was 3 properties that are before us now.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Noyes, I have not had those discussions yet, but we have offered for individuals to meet with us. I think that a lot of the individuals are waiting to see what the decision is by council before they meet with staff and discuss the attributes.
Okay, I would think it'd be the other way around, but it'll be interesting to see what happens because there's that appeal period. In regards to the 4 that are before us, I think, I didn't see any description that I can recall. Like there was a lot of information there about the interior of Princess Street, the interior of the one on the boulevard. Did ARA actually go inside these buildings?
Through you, Madam Chair, ARA has gone through a few of the buildings. However, they are not designating any interior features.
But they have actually gone inside these buildings?
They've gone in a few of them where permission was accessed or granted.
Okay, I'm just, because there's not a lot of information on the interior on these 4. And I know that when we did Shirkston, there was a lot of detail about the wainscoting and the interior work and things like that I don't see in these reports. I'm just wondering if ARA actually got inside these buildings, but you're telling me they have.
They have gone through some of them. I don't believe that they have gone through any of these ones.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Well, point of order, they did go through 487 in the report. They went upstairs, downstairs, into the basement, so that's in the report.
What's 487?
47 Niagara Boulevard.
Oh, Niagara Boulevard, okay. Okay, and I think it's great because I think if the owners allow ARA in, you know, they're obviously buying into the program, and that's all good stuff, but I do think it's important to get the owners, you know, approval of all this. There's one other thing. Can't read my own writing. In regards to the grant program, where there's a 40%, up to 40%, and that's what I think we currently are as 40%, right, we're at the top. Do you know if any of the other municipalities around us are providing that amount of refund?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Noyes, all municipalities follow the same criteria for the Heritage Tax Rebate Program. So they are providing up to 40%.
But do we know if they are, like it's 10% to 40%?
I don't know exactly what the amount is that they're providing, but we can find out.
Okay, fair enough. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about each particular property, but thank you.
Are there any more questions, Ms. Smith? Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So we now move to the reports. The first report is PDS 33-2024. Can I get a mover? Councillor Dubanow. Are there any questions or comments with respect to this report? Councillor Noyes.
Again, I think this is one of them that we have had some input from the owner of the 168 High Street that he is in support of this. So I will be supporting this because we did get a definite yes. Thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments? No, then I'll call the question. All those in favor? Approved. Carried. The next one is Report 10.2.2, PDS 34-2024, Heritage Property Designation 400 Holloway Bay Road South. Councillor, my mind's going blank.
That'd be Councillor Lewis.
That's really bad.
Oh, what's his name?
Okay, yes. All right.
Like Young and the Restless.
Yeah. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to be supporting this. I think it's an important property to designate. I just want to note that we have spent a year and a half giving plenty of opportunity for this owner to either say yes, no, ask questions, speak with staff, find out more information. I feel, particularly we've gone to the extent of registered letters, which staff have confirmed that have been received by the owners. I'm of the opinion that if you are that concerned about your property not being designated, and the municipality is spending a year and a half, I'd almost go so far as to say begging you for comment to find out where you stand, and you don't offer up any comment at all, I take that as an implied yes. They have the right of refusal, or rather the right to raise that objection with us, and they have not done so. So I'm confident to proceed with this. I feel comfortable doing it. The owners still have the opportunity to raise an appeal. I'm sure that would our efforts to raise this beforehand would come up during an appeal. So I'll be supporting this. Fantastic area of town, fantastic piece of property, and I'm looking forward to getting this designated. Thank you.
Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor Christensen. I'm going to support this because it's not the bylaw stage yet, but I think we have to try very, very much harder, maybe a different method, whatever, to get a yes, because this is their home. And again, it's like, how many times have we had meetings on water bills and this bill and that bill and increases, and we don't hear anything until they actually get the bill. But in this case, it's a win-win, because if they get the bill, there should be a reduction of 40% in their taxes up to 500. So it's a plus for them, but I think we have to work a little harder to get the yes, because I would hate to see us spending $20,000 through the if we don't change our mind, if they protest. I think we've been fairly successful in getting people on board. For instance, 168 High Street's a good example. We weren't on the same page initially, but it appears that we are now. So I do think that we should work harder to get to the yes. And also just want to point out well, I'll wait for, that'll be for the new 12 or whatever that we're going to suggest, we're going to discuss later. So at this point, I am in favor of this. But I do hope that we get to a definite yes. And it should be a yes. Thank you.
Councillor Lewis, did you have, no? Okay. All right, then, any other questions? So call the question. All those in favor? Carried. The next item is PDS 35, 2024, designation of 45 Princess Street. Councillor Dubanow? Oh, yes, sorry. Councillor Dubanow. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Noyes?
I think this is also one of the properties that we did not go inside. Pretty sure this is one of them. And it would be helpful if we're going to do the designation, if the owner is agreeable to that. And again, it's, trying to get to that yes, a definite yes, as opposed to no comment. Because no comment doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to have a problem down the road. I'd rather make it a win-win situation. Thank you.
Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to provide some information to Councillor Noyes. Although the consultant's ARA did not go into, or at least my understanding is they weren't able to get into 45 Princess, I believe that there were walkthroughs done by members of the Heritage Committee, or at least attempts were made to do that. Again, I'm going back months, and there's a lot in there, and there's only so much you can recall at any time. But I distinctly remember that there were discussions among the Heritage Committee to actually go into the property. Before we, just for some information for council, before we brought ARA on board to do a lot of these designation reports, members of the Heritage Committee were the ones who actually did the property, the site inspections, the walkthroughs, the other things related to that. So even though ARA may have not been the one who did the work interior on this property to do the walkthrough, it's something the Heritage Committee does. And it's something they still do now, even with ARA, if there's clarification, or if ARA gives information that, with the, almost the shared memory and knowledge of the community, if they want some clarification or want to double check something, they take it upon themselves to do that as well. So it's not just ARA here. There are multiple hands in the cookie jar, if you will, involved in putting these reports together. I just wanted to mention that because I didn't want to take away from the work that the Heritage Committee themselves do. They put a lot of effort into this, and it's fully volunteer based for them, and they spend a lot of their own free time doing this because they love what they do. So I just wanted to raise that. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Are there any other questions or comments? No? Then call the question. All in favor? Carried. So we move on to PDS 36, 2024, 487 Niagara Boulevard, Your Worship. Moves it. Are there any questions or comments? I'll call the question. All in favor? Carried. The next is PDS 38, 20, okay, that. PDS, yes, that is been withdrawn, so PDS 39, 2024. That ends, I think that ends all of our designations. So yes, PDS 39, 2024. proposed draft plan of standard condominium recommendation report for 412 Ridge Road. Councillor Lewis, on the floor for questions or Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor Christian. I don't know exactly what page it's on the report, but it talks about that we're not required, and I understand that, to do a public open house or an open house. That it's no longer, I think an open house was never really a requirement anyway, but anyway, did we do either? I know it's not required, but did either happen?
Ms. Delwaria.
Madam Chair, through you to the councillor. This application had gone through different planning applications, so it had gone through a minor variance, which is a public process, so we had consulted public through that. So because it had gone through a public process, we did not go through an open house for this one.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments? No? Call the question. All in favor? Carried. The next is PDS 49, 2024, Archaeological Research Associates Limited change order. Councillor McDermott moves. Open for question or comment. Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor Christian. This is referring to an increase in the budget of $66,000, and I think, and I did have a discussion with Mr. McQueen earlier today in regards to it's dealing with the 12 properties, if I'm not mistaken, that still have to be examined, if I'm not mistaken. Do we know if any of those properties have already said no?
Madam Chair, through you to the councillor, no, we are not at that stage. We are just, these properties are already on the register, so we are getting ARA to provide us with the reports. Once we get the report, we would have all the information, and then we would be able to be consulting with the owner of the property.
Thank you for that. If I can continue, in the staff report, it talks about if the owner, it's in one of the reports, there are several reports on heritage that we had, that if the owner is not in agreement, that the designation should not go forward. I think that was on Matthews Road, that's not being designated, because the owner did not want that designation. So prior to getting ARA involved and long reports, I think we should try to get an answer from the owners of these 12 properties, I think many of them are churches and things, to ensure that they are interested. Because if their answer is no, according to ARA, and I think even our own staff, that we shouldn't proceed. Because if the owner doesn't want it and he's not going to allow you into the property, et cetera, then maybe we shouldn't. We should be working hard to get the yes. The other thought I had is that I think we've all read these reports, the ones that before us. I think there's a lot of information in there that isn't necessarily needed, and I don't mean that in a negative way, so to speak. I think the word that comes to us is a lot of the information is superfluous. Like, I mean, is it really important to know who owned that house over the 150 years or the 100 years? Some of the detail, although interesting, isn't necessary. And I'm thinking that if we can kind of perhaps streamline the ARA reports, we can perhaps find some cost savings in that. I have, in discussion with Mr. McQueen earlier today, I understand that the money's going to be put in reserves anyway, and if we don't need it, we won't be using it, so to speak, it'll be there. So whether we divide it up into 2 years, because we now have an extension of 2 years, so that urgency of having to have it done by the end of December is no longer there. And I thought, well, can we not kind of like make the costs go over a few years instead of changing the budget this year? But again, in the long run, it really doesn't make much difference. But I thought even if you could contract ARA, and have a 2 or 3 year contract with them, or like in this case, I guess it would be a 2-year contract, would that help us with the financing of it? But I guess in the long run, it really doesn't make much difference, because they're not going to use it when they unless they actually do the report. But again, I strongly encourage us to get a yes before we invest. I think each report's around, I don't know where the 12,000 is in my head, but is around 12,000, 10 to 12,000 to do these reports on each, or maybe I'm seeing the mayor shake his head, maybe it's 6,000?
Divide 66 by 12.
Yeah, but I think some of the work may have,
5,500.
okay, so it's 5,000 to do the work. Then, is there some cost savings that can be done there? I know it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but again, we should have a yes before we proceed. Thank you.
Your worship.
Yeah, so these reports are prepared to ensure that if there's a challenge, there's information that's available that justifies why the recommendation is being made by the consultant. So you can streamline this if you want, but that's a lot like asking any professional to streamline their reports, and then there's information that's not included, which, if needs to be put before a tribunal, has to be there. So that's why these reports are crafted the way they're crafted. In terms of these various properties, most of these have been on the list, the registry, since at least 2011, some of them longer. And the property owners were all given notification at that time, and many of them have done nothing about it. So I do agree with the notion that if we can get cooperation, we should try to do that. But I don't agree with holding up a process to get us to trying to protect these properties by designating them, waiting for these individuals to respond. So I think we can do both at the same time. I think that our staff can, and the committee can try to get contact with the owners, try to provide information, what have you. But I do believe we need to move forward with the process. And if we can get a yes, great. If we can get a no, I guess we'll have to deal with it when we get there. We've already designated 2 properties where there were no's, one of which was One Burns Place, and I'm pretty confident that we were never going to get a yes from that property owner. And the other was at 5 something or other Ridge Road across the street. That's been appealed. That was settled. So because there was some accommodation with respect to the designations. The reality is these are important properties with respect to the history of our community. We have adopted as a strategic plan, objective, strategic goal 3.2, continue to implement policies that will enhance and protect the town's built heritage, including a review of the grant funding program and key measurements. So while I agree that we should try to get cooperation, and I'm on board with you on that, I do still believe we need to move forward with the process. So I'm going to support this report.
Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I will be supporting this as well, but I just want to touch on the mayor's comment with respect to the consultant and providing the background information. This was ultimately the reason why they were brought in, and going back to when this process started, when we felt we were under the gun at the time with the provincial changes that had been put in place. And we have a committee of volunteers. We do have heritage experts who are on the heritage committee. In fact, I think we just recently added another member, but they're volunteers. They're doing it in a volunteer capacity because they love and appreciate the natural or the built heritage in our community. They have professional jobs that they do that they deal with this in other ways outside of the municipality. So when ARA was brought in, it was to ensure that we had professionals that were drafting these reports and the subsequent bylaws to ensure that they met all of the requirements necessary to take some of the burden off staff and to take some of the burden off the committee. But also, Councillor Noyes raised earlier about the cost. This was also something that was raised by the committee as well. But when we looked back at the background information and the information they collect and the burden they remove off of staff and the committee members and the work that was required to be done in order to get these properties off the register and get them designated, anyone who knows the committee, the cost is always a concern that they have. It's That's always a concern that they raise. But in the end, they thought that this was a necessary and a beneficial expense because of the benefit that it brings to the community as a whole. So it's, I know we look at this number, but we are getting work out of it. A lot of that duplicate information that Councillor Noyes had mentioned is background information that's required in these reports to ensure that they meet all the requirements for designation under provincial legislation. It looks, kind of, like a duplicate or repetitive, if you will, but it's necessary. And that's why we brought ARA on board, to ensure that all those Ts were crossed and those Is were dotted. The committee does fantastic work, but they're volunteers. Our staff do fantastic work, but they deal with more than just heritage itself. So that's why these experts were brought in, and that's why we're extending it. And, I just want to caution members of council as well. What the provincial government giveth, the provincial government can take away. So they may have made a decision now, for whatever reason, to extend this deadline for 2 years, but we have seen that decisions are made and then they're rolled back. I don't think we can take anything for granted when we are at this point now. Some municipalities are so far behind the ball that they were going to lose their entire register because they weren't able to do this. We have gotten so close. I don't want us to kick that can down the road thinking, well, we've got 2 more years to do this, and then something changes at Queen's Park and we're right back to where we started under Bill 23. So I think we need to move forward on this. I think it's a good idea to move forward with, and I am going to be supporting this as well. Thank you.
Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor Christensen. Again, I just want to clarify my position. I think I said earlier, I'm okay with the 66,000 or the 72. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the 12. I'm not, but I'm asking that if we can get a yes, which I think everybody would hope for, that if we have a yes, these very detailed reports can be cut back. We don't need that much information if we already have the person, the owner, in agreement with the designation. I'm just saying if there's efficiency that can be found and these reports can be cut back a little bit, and we save money, it's a win-win. We can put that money towards number 13, so to speak. So I'm not against the 66,000. I just, when I'm reading these reports, I think a lot of this information is superfluous. We don't really need pictures of the surrounding buildings. We don't really, there's like pages and pages and pages of information, which is really, when you go to their chart, that type of thing, is really narrowed down considerably to it. And I know that there's different avenues that they look at. I know the Voices of Fort Erie? Fort Erie Voices or whatever. Well, it's called something. I can't remember. Something with voices, isn't it? Okay, correct me. Many Voices. Is that what it is? I can remember having that book, and it was a really good book. And for the places that I was familiar with, I looked it up, and it had a lot of information in there, which is great. But again, I'm just looking for efficiencies. I think that the reports are very, very long. And if it's a yes, it's a yes. So if we can streamline it, let's streamline it. And if it's a no, we need to rethink.
Yeah, I don't want to beat this dead horse, but I just want to caution staff. I think it's a great idea to streamline the report because you've got a yes. The problem is, right up until we pass the bylaw, there could be a no. And I don't want to have our lawyer going into court, going to a tribunal with a part of a report because they thought we were going to get a yes or a cooperation, and it turns out there's a no. So I do think, a lot of this is boilerplate. Much of the information in the report, there's pages and pages that are just reiteration. There's some that's quite specific. The Princess Street, where there were photographs of the neighborhood, that was because the context was of importance. And the same with the Holloway Bay. Was important because it's one structure out of a number in a compound. So I just think staff ought to be cautious about that. I'm all for saving money, and Councillor Noyes, I agree with you on that point. I just want to make sure that we don't end up with our shorts down if they should be up.
Thank you.
That analogy.
Just as a rule of,
that analogy.
just as a rule of thumb, they should always be up.
Are there any other comments or inquiries? Okay. We'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Move on to new business. Is there any new business or inquiries? Okay. Move on to the business status report. Are there any questions? Okay. That being said, Your Worship, the Planning and Development Services Committee meeting is now over, and I'll pass the chair back.
Thank you, Councillor Christensen. You did an excellent job with many reports. In fact, you were the hardest worker tonight because now we're going to go to corporate services. Councillor Flagg is next.
Thank you, Your Worship. Efficiency should not be viewed upon poorly. We will start, there are no presentations, delegations, no reports. Any new business inquiries? Seeing none, any questions on the business status report? Seeing none, back to you, Your Worship.
Very efficient, and I see you've got your pants up, which is good. Which is good. Okay, we have a matter to deal with in closed session. Can I have a motion to go into closed session, Councillor Lewis? Any questions or comments about that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We're back in the council session, and Councillor Lewis, you have the resolution for us to come out of closed session.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself that council does now rise and reconvene from closed session at 8:28 p.m. with report that council approves of the closed session minutes of June 24th, 2024, and that council approved the confidential report CAO 07-2024 physician recruitment incentive funding for Dr. Rashana Baharti.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That takes us to scheduling of meetings. Anyone? Councillor Noyes.
There's the champion, the climate, the champion meeting for environmental and climate change resiliency tomorrow at 10 a.m. in, I think it's committee room 1, conference room 1.
Okay. And anyone else? Then Councillor Dubanow, I'd like to go to you.
Yes, Your Worship, I'd like to move the council and committee adjourn this evening at 8:29 p.m.
All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you, folks.